Now we're on Daf Ayin Amid Beis. So what is spelt in the language of the Arameans? It's Gulba. And now we talk about Rai, Shivon, that's called Dishra. Now we talk about Ot Shibol Shul, that's called Shibule Tala. Interesting, there's a little similarity here between Aramaic and Hebrew. Okay, Frekta Gemara, Hani in. There are only 5 grains. What about Orez Vidochan? Orez Vidochan lo, that if you make a bread out of rice or out of millet, which is very similar to rice, it's not chayiv and challah, and it would not be subject to the Isser of Chadash. Minani Mili, how does the Mishnah know such a thing? Omrei Shlokish, Asyo lechem lechem matzah. So you can't make matzah out of orez or dochen, according to most of the Tanoim. And that's because that which you produce as a dough from rice or millet is not considered lechem. And now we have Gzeres Shava that equates the halacha of challah with the halacha of matzah. Whatever you could use for the mitzvah of matzah, would be chayiv and challah, and whatever you cannot use and excluded from matzah is not chayiv and challah. Ksiv hacha, here in the case of challah, it says vayabacholchem lechem aretz. We're going to emphasize the word lechem. Uksiv hasav, and in the parsha of matzah, lechem oni. And therefore, we're going to say, just like to eat matzah, you got to eat matzah that was made of one of the 5 species of grains, but not from rice. So too, challah is only chayiv if you made the dough from one of the 5 species of grains. Well, hazam gufa, and in matzah itself, how do you know that rice matzah is not lechem? Minolan. Amakra, that pasuk says with regard to the Korban Pesach, lo sochal olav chametz shivas yomim tochal olav matzos lechem. Okay, so what did you get here from this pasuk? So the answer is the pasuk combines matzah with chametz, meaning don't eat chametz, but rather eat matzah. So therefore, davar habali de chimutz, if you would have left it to leaven, it would have become chametz. Then, adam yotzi yidei chovaso b'pesach. Yotzu elu, but this we're going to exclude rice and millet. She'ein boim lidei chimutz, you cannot leaven them and make a bread out of it. We see that there is something that you can make from rice. The answer is elidei siracham. Relative to the real bread, it's called sirachim, which means spoilage. And as I said before, there's at least one Tana that I remember disagrees with this. That's Rabbi Yochanan Nuri, I think it is. He holds that even rice is something that you can make leaven, you can make bread from. So now we have a little bit of a problem that I indicated earlier, because the Mishnah seems to say that you can integrate all 5 grains together to make up the shear of challah, and yet the Brisa says no, that kusmin is min chita, and shibol shul and shifot is min that's barley, saora. So it's a very interesting thing here. In the Rishonim, it would seem, and this I believe is the Shita of the Bali Tosfos, that kusmin could go either way. Kusmin could be subdivided, it could be a subdivision of either wheat or barley, chita siora. So you could be mitzaref kusmin to make up the shir of challah with either chita or with siora. So kusmin becomes like the combiner of everything. But as far as shibboleth shul and shifon, so they can only be integrated to form the shear of challah if you add them to barley, but not to chita. And the other way around is also true, that chita would not be integrated with any of the others. Anyway, mitztarfim zem zeh. Tana, we learned in the Brisa, hatvua vakmochim vabeitzos mitztarfim zem zeh. So let's say you have grains that have not yet been made into flour, and you have flour, and you have dough. All of those together can be integrated. And Lamai Hilchasa, for what law? What's the impact of integrating them all together? Rav Kahana le'inyan chadash. So that's one shita. That as far as chadash is concerned, the shear from Malchus in eating chadash before the Omer is one kizayis, and if you have one kizayis before the Omer, that's an integration of grains, flour, and dough. You're chayav for a kizayis. Rav Yosef Amar Linyan Chametz Pesach, that if you eat chametz on Pesach, Chayiv Kares, and that chametz could be an integration of both grains, flour, and dough. Now, this is a problem here because flour is not chametz, and certainly grains are not chametz. So for this, Rashi says we have to know sugis and psachim, that kernels of wheat can become chametz when you soak them in water. That's why, for those who are makpid to get rid of any chametz gamur, you have to know if you have grains like, oatmeal and things like that, you have to know whether it's bleached or not. If it's bleached in water, then you have a chashash of chametz. But Rav Papa Amar Linyan Maser Sheni. Now the Torah says Al Sucha Lechel B'Sharecha, which means that if you eat Maser Sheni outside of the walls of Yerushalayim, you get Malchus. Di Ochele Chutz L'Choma Loki. And once again, we're going to integrate flour with grains and dough to create a kizayis for the Iser of Achilas Maser Sheni Chutz Yerushalayim. Okay. Okay, till now we're doing okay. Till Rava comes and we're back from Zroim, Kodshim. Now we're in Tumah V'Tara. Le'inyan Tumas Ochli. So what's the shear of an Ochel? To be Makawal Tumah and to pass on Tumah. That's Machlokas Rashi and Tos. Anyway, it's a shear of Kibetza. Well, Kamashbalon de Tvua Kmochim Udum Yud B'Tzakos. Ma Hasam Ochla B'Ene. Afachanami Ochla B'Ene. Okay. So now we get into, to understand Rava, something called grains on the one hand, and on the other hand, we have something called kernels, which is a kind of a covering over the barley. And we have what's called bran. And here we're going to make a distinction, says Rav, between chita, wheat on the one hand, and siora and barley on the other hand. And what it means is that we're going to derive from the case of bitsekos, which are the dough, and we're going to say that tuah kmochim dumya de bitsekos. And bitsekos is interpreted, I mean, you have to see the Rishonim, Rabbeinu Gershom, and others, but basically it's unadulterated food, which means that it's not mixed with bran or with the husks. And again, all that is in the case of siora, of barley. So you have husks of barley, and you can't eat the husks. It's just not edible. You have the bran of barley, and it's not edible. But chita, that's what the Gemara now quotes a brisa to support Rava. With regard to chita, ben klufa, ben shena klufa, even if it's not klufa, meaning you haven't peeled off the husk, mitztarefes, meaning the husk of chita is edible, and therefore it's integrated to the shem to generate the shema ochel that requires a kibetza for kabbal's tumah. And even though the husks of wheat kernels are edible, but nevertheless siora, when we get to barley, klufa in mitzarefes, right? But ain't a klufa if you have the husks. Ain't a mitzarefes, the husks of barley are not edible. In fact, the Gemara Aini, is that really true? Veha tana de Be Rabbi Shmo, we have a brisa that he's talking about zroim, meaning seeds, where they're subject to tumas ochlin, and he darshans the pasuk al kol zera zerua, I think it's zeru, I can't see it. Asher yizara. There are two extra words here. Asher yizara. And what do we derive from the two words Asher yizara? B'derech shebnei adam motziin lizriya. So what do people do or take for planting? Chita beklipasa, usiara beklipasa. That means that even in the case of barley, the husks of the barley are used for planting. And as far as tumah is concerned, the Torah adds Asher Yizara to tell you that there's Kabbalah's tumah even on that which is planted. And that would tell you that the husks of barley are planted. Vadoshim b'kli chasam, and lentils in their husks. All this can be planted, and if it can be planted, it's included in the riboy of Asher Yizara for Kabbalah's tumah. So now we see that kernels of barley, which have their husks, nevertheless are susceptible to Kabbalah's tumah, to tumah contamination. Now, this Rashi says introduces a whole nother concept which is so relevant to the Masechta Brachos, it's called Shomer Lepri. A Shomer Lepri has the status of a pri. In other words, God created in nature such that there's something that surrounds, like what we call a peel and so forth and so on, or a husk in the case of barley, that surrounds the kernel and protects the kernel. And that means that even though the husk itself is not edible, but it gets a status of an ochel by virtue of the fact that it's a shomer lepri. Lo kasha belachos ha b'yeveshos. You want to know whether husks are considered part of the ochel to generate a shear of kibetza for Kabbalah's tumah. It depends whether it's lachos. If it's lachos and the husks are moist, they're not going to just dry up and wither away, and therefore they protect the kernels. And if they protect the kernels, they have a din of shomer lepri, and shomer lepri is kipri dami, and therefore it integrates into the kibetza to form something that's makabel tumah. But the eveshos, which are husks that can't protect the kernel because they just wither away and they disintegrate, and therefore they cannot be used. They're certainly not edible, these husks that are yeveshos, and not only that, they're not even shomer lepri, and therefore they don't have any status, they cannot be integrated, which is good news in a sense, sekula, because it's not going to be kabel tumah. Now the Mishnah says, Asurim b'chadash milifnei. It's not clear what the girsa is. Even if the girsa is lifnei Pesach, it doesn't mean the first day of Pesach. It means the second day of Pesach, the Omer. Minani mili. How do we know that all five grains all five species of grains are subject to the Iser Chadash? Amar Rish Lakish Asil Lechem Lechem Imatza. Once again, we have a Gzer Shavu Lechem Lechem, but now we're quoting the Lechem in the Parsha of Chadash. So we'd have to open up now to Vayikra Perek Chaf Gimel, And unfortunately, I only have the English translation here. I don't have time to open up the pasuk, but it says that lechem v'kol v'kar lo sochlu ad etzem hayom hazeh. Lechem v'koli v'karamel. I was able to translate from the English lechem, and lechem is lechem oni and matzah. So just like the 5 species of grains can make matzah for the mitzvah matzah, so too the 5 species of grains are included in the Iser Chadash of lechem lo sochlu ad etzem hayom hazeh ad aviechem es omertiv. Frek the Gemara, right? The Mishnah says litzor. Not only that, but there's a prohibition against cutting down from the new crops before Pesach. Where is it derived from? Omar Reb Yochanan, Asya Rashis Michalo. Now, the Torah says that the Omer has to be Rashis Ktsirchem, that the mitzvah is to bring the first of your harvest as a korban mincha of the Omer. And with regard to Chal, the Torah says Rashis Harisol Sechem. So the word Rashis appears both with regard to the Ktsira of the Chadash and with regard to Chala. And just like Chal applies to any of the 5 grains, therefore the prohibition against harvesting of Ktsira from Chadash before the Omer is brought applies to all 5 grains. My Kodem Li Omer. Now we're going to get into a whole issue where the Iser Ktsira and the Iser Achila are interdependent. Rabbi Yonah Amar Kodem Ktsira Somer. Rabbi Yonah says, you know what? Ktsira L'chud and Achila L'chud, meaning Ktsira is at night, the night going into the 16th, and you'd be allowed to cut from the new Tvua after the Ktsira of the Omer on the night, but Achila depends upon the day when you bring the Omer. Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda Omer, on the other hand, Kodem Avos HaOmer, everything depends upon the Omer, meaning the heter of Ktsira from the new crop is delayed until the next morning, the morning of the 16th. And now the Gemara brings a Mishnah to support Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda. Tonight we learned in the Mishnah, this is the Mishnah here that we learned here in Rabbi Shmuel, Asurim b'chadash lifnei ha'omer, v'liksar lifnei ha'omer. So you see that the Mishnah is comparing the Iser Achila with the Iser Ktsira, and everything depends upon the Omer. It works very well according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda. The Omar, he holds Kodem Avos HaOmer, meaning that the Ktsira depends upon Avos HaOmer. Hainu de Loka Oriv Lahu V'Tani Lahu. Just 1 second. Did I get that right? Yeah. According to Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda. Right, according to Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda, who says that the Ktsira is mutter after the Ktsira of the Omer, and the Achila is mutter only after the Havas HaOmer, is therefore there are 2 separate Zmanim, and therefore Loka Oriv Luvatani, the Mishnah didn't combine the 2 and talk about Achila and Ktsira together in one sentence. Because Rabbi Yossi holds that the matir of Ktsira of Chadash and the matir of Achilas Chadash are separated in 2 different time periods, whereas the matir of Ktsira is at night and the matir of the Achila is only in the day when they brought the Omer. Elaman the Omer, but according to Rav Yonah, who says that what? That Kodem Ktsira Omer is therefore, according to Rav Yonah, it should have said Asur b'Chodesh Eliksar Lifnei Pesach. Why? Because Rabbi Yonah holds Kodem Ktsira, that even as far as Achila is concerned, we only have to wait until the harvesting and the Ktsira of the Omer, which means at night. So then it's all one time period. Meaning the matir of Achila and the matir of Ktsira are simultaneous, which are at night, and the Mishnah should have combined this together, and it should have said, Asur v'chodesh v'liktov ne'at Pesach, Eli Itmar, and therefore the Gemara is going to reinterpret Rabbi Yonah is a Sefer Itmar, and Hishrishu Kodim LaOmer, HaOmer Matiron, right? The Omer can only matir that which had a 3-day period of time since the planting. Before the Omer, that let's see, the Omer is brought on the 16th, so let's go back 3 days. That means 40, 50, it was this planting, the Hashosha took place because the planting was on the 14th of Nisan. Is then the Omer's matir. My Kodem LaOmer. Now Rabbi Yonah is going to be machmir. He's going to say, no, the 14th is not enough. Why? Because Kodem Avos HaOmer. You need 3 days of planting before. Sorry. So Rabbi Yonah is Mekil. I'm sorry. The 14th will be fine. Why? Because the 3-day Hashosha period is calculated from the Avos HaOmer, which is on the 16th. But Rabbi Yossi Bar Zavda Omer, he's going to be more machmir. You have to, in order to get the matir of Chodosh, of the Omer, you're going to have to plant it earlier when Kodem Ketziras Omer, and the Ketziras at night. So you're going to have to go back like to the 13th. Okay? And that's where we're going to stop for today. We made it under the wire. Well, I'm telling you, we're like learning a whole different Masechta here. I mean, Menachos was hard enough, Now, how do you shut this thing off? They messed me up because that time when my machine went bad on me, I don't know. I'll just going to do it the